Perfect. There it is.
Now we're really live.
Now we're really live. Woo. Hello, Gen Con. Thank you so much for accommodating us. We are going to do a panel today on the art of world building in a tabletop RPG writer's room. So what we have assembled here in front of you is a collection of people who work in the tabletop RPG space professionally. We are writers, designers, world builders, and we'll just go down the aisle and talk about who we are, introduce sort of what our background is. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually do live world building in front of you, facilitated using the deck of video class. We're going to discuss the great choices that we're making with the cards, why we think this choice is interesting, and provide some really interesting opportunities for interactive storytelling through tabletop roleplay. And then at the end, we can do a little question session. I think also at the end, we'll do one prompt where we throw it over to the audience to discuss what they see in the prompt, what they think they would choose. We're going to be doing some tabletop RPG. We'll be talking both in the capacity of, if you want to become a professional writer in the tabletop RPG space, some thoughts that might be helpful creatively in world building, as well as just running your home game. Seeing principles apply in both situations. But to get us started, why don't we go down and start with Eric, and we'll move down towards Miroki, introducing ourselves and our backgrounds in tabletop RPG and writing.
Okay, my name is Eric. I am the community manager for the Story Engine. Before that, I've also worked a narrative designer for Nomnivore Games for the game EMBERWIND. I also worked for the Mysterious Company for a short spell, and have been involved in video games as a critic before that. So various writing hats are adjacent to or
my name is Peter Chiykowski. I'm the designer of I also do writing for Nomnivore Games with EMBERWIND. I've done a little bit for the Drinking Quest tabletop RPG. For the video game Fractor, I've published 3 books of short stories and a number of books of comics. So I love writing. I love discovering how storytelling and world building looks different in different media. So I love working in creative formats.
Hi everyone. So my name is Derek, and I'm the president for Nomnivore Games, which is a company making samples for gaming and gaming as accessible as possible, making everything neurodivergent and friendly. I'm coming on the panel in a slightly different way than everyone else. Well, I do a bit of writing as well. As established with these two amazing guys, I more so from the I occupy the directorial seat where I deal with a lot of writers and for a lot of text writing and piecing together exactly who's going to with a cohesive storyline that's also really meaningful and impactful to the people who end up playing it. And I work with material for kids as young as 2 to 3, all the way up to your typical 80-year-old veteran neckbeard.
And it's a great pleasure to say his superpower is when like us.
I don't think my mic works, but I have a big voice. If the people in the back, can you hear me? Wonderful. My name is Miroki Tong. I am the CEO of the Story Engine. I think similar to Derek, I occupy a very different space. I have written in the past. I obviously love science fiction, fantasy, and I would love to write a novel someday. However, my role, obviously as CEO, often is the more pragmatic side of the business. So I kind of make sure worlds and creations make it to paper, make it to a game, make it to final product. I have a history, former career in film and theater production. So I've done a lot of devised theater, which is world building in its own way. But a lot of the stuff I do is kind of taking the dream and finding a way to make it a reality, which in the world of world building is extremely important.
So I love talking about and teaching sort of active creativity, how to think creatively, how to work creatively, but it's a really hard thing to talk about abstractly. So one of the things we're going to be doing today is using something called the Deck of Worlds, which is a deck of world building prompts I designed to actually do some live world building and show you what the process looks like and talk about it while we're doing it. We can actually point to the creative choices that we're making and discuss them. I think if you have a question midway through, raise your hand, and what we'll do is we'll get the next point, we can discuss it, because I think it might be helpful and illustrative in the moment to be able to talk about that instead of going back like 15 minutes ago, you're making this great choice. So feel free to raise your hands and acknowledge questions at the table. But without further ado, I think we'll get started.
Peter, I also think something we should do, because we do this a lot on our live streams, we really love inviting audience participation. Different Worlds kind of gives everyone the opportunity to be together. So we won't be able to do it for every card, just in the interest of time, but maybe for things like, maybe marks, we can kind of do a quick audience vote, and we can kind of see what you guys want to build in terms of a world together. That, all right.
All right. So we're going to start, we're figuring out what type of terrain we're in. So are we in a delta, a moraine, kind of like a rocky landscape, or a big city?
So if you love Delta, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. How about a moraine? Okay. And a city. I feel like that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's definitely a city. All right. The city has taken it.
So let's start by talking about what do you think is interesting about world building in a city, like a dense urban environment, as opposed to doing world building in a big open natural environment like a moraine or like a delta.
I find cities in some ways can be really complicated really fast, because the thing that cities usually have, unless you're thinking about like small villages or hamlets, is that there's already going to be a population of people inside of it. So now you immediately have to think of things like architecture and structure and roadways and culture in a way that perhaps in nature, you almost have a blank slate and you can be forgiven a lot if you're just walking along roads, and we have kind of these universally understood concepts of trees and forests. I find that one of the things that we've talked a lot about in world building that I find that gets missed a lot is the granular details that kind of make worlds tangible. So one of the things I really despise when I watch what I call what do I call them, like kind of like mass-made fantasy movies out in the public, is that they are so careless. I can't remember which film it was. I feel like it was like one of those Disney adjacent films, but it was very, very, I think they literally just spray painted a bunch of fruit glitter colors and just put it on gold, and they were thinking, oh, if we just make something shiny looking. Fantasy. But if anyone has an eye for world building, you'll immediately see that's a pear. And I think that that's that kind of takes you out of the world in a more jarring way than just creating something that we already are anchored in, like a pear. A pear is a pear. Right? I remember one of the things that like Avatar has. I'm assuming most of us in here has watched Avatar. And if you haven't, no judgment, but you should watch it. I didn't watch it till I was an adult. And I still fell in love with it. And one of the things they have that joke is like the cabbage sector. It's like, and it's just cabbages. Yeah, and it's just cabbages, right? Inherently, the world is fantasy, but we are rooted in things that we know and understand. And that actually draws us people into the world.
To add to that a little bit, one of the things that a lot of people end up overlooking, especially when they're world building, and this is really forgivable for like tabletop RPGs, is when they're talking about music. I don't know if you guys have watched like Star Wars or like whatever. Every epic sci-fi always has your grand orchestra, and you're like, wait a minute, these are aliens, and like however millions of years ago they're still playing a piano. So a really good example of that's actually the recent remake of They the music there, and he was like, well, that doesn't make sense. The only voice that's going to, the only instrument that's going to continue to exist at this point is the human voice, because it tells human stories, and everything else needs to be invented. So his instrumentation actually all came from a hardware store. He just bought like a bunch of people and put everything together to make up a new sound. Yeah.
It's a very like Tom Waits way to make an album.
Right, I know.
Just gonna go make some random noises in an old house.
We got by the way.
Yeah, awesome. Question for you.
So I come from a photography background. So when we're talking about the city, I'm curious about how the geography would have to affect the city, like Venice, where you got lots of water and canals and delta.
So that is actually why I left this card out, just for like as an example later. One thing that we notice is like if you lead with a card that's like cliffs, as you look at follow-up cards, we'll kind of lead towards natural environments, or like natural features like waterfalls or lakes and ponds, where it's like really there's no rule about what kind of terrain you're in. So you can have a city and a delta, And I left that one there as our second card. And it's like that's when you start to like look at what kind of features the city might have. You know that your city is built at the top of a river, that's going to have different architecture than your city is built up in the mountains. And I find that's like a really, really important thing to keep in mind for a lot of world building. It's just like, well, it's not just a city. It's not all going to be. A city doesn't have to be concrete and concrete. A city can be mud. It can be built in trees. It can be built in a mountain if you've got dwarves. And so it's like thinking about what kind of area your city is in is a really good starting point for what kind of geography and layout you can have.
And we have these prompts as we go down the line here we'll add terrain features and other climate elements on top of just what we have on the region cards. But one thing that we think that helps facilitate is making one creative decision at a time and then layering them on. And you can even go in and backfill details as new cards add details that would have been relevant in the previous stage. But it's really hard, I find, to world build a whole world at once. Like there's just too many decisions to make too quickly. So I like the creative process one decision at a time, and at the end, I end up with something that's more expensive and immersive. But speaking of like a delta-based city, yeah, I would say don't think of urban environments as being exclusive of natural ones. So both in the way that we could have chosen the term delta and still just figure out what that looks like. We can also look at the word city, and nature is not expelled from the city. You know, to quote the great chaos mathematician Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, life finds a way. Life exists in cities, right? Like life has been completely, the nature has been changed by cities, but there are species that adapt beautifully to living in the shadow of species like humans. So if you're building a city, don't think that's the end of wildlife. Like there's going to be all kinds of plants that thrive in cracks concrete. There's going to be urban landscaping. They intentionally plant certain types of plants that they think are beautiful or helpful for food or helpful for herbs or other rivers.
Like we're all either Toronto, we all live in Toronto or formerly Toronto, and so I can tell you for sure, it's like we have plenty of friends. They are part of our city. Yeah. They are part of our infrastructure.
A really illustrative moment of that too is also behind that. Cities can also be reached by nature as well. And I don't have any people here who played or heard of the game Last of Us, but there's this really point moment where like just left in, didn't really do very much for the game, but when Ellie and Joel reached that rooftop and looking out at the environment, you're taking back the city. And that's such a big world building. So, you know, if people haven't checked that out yet, do it. I don't want to say any more to spoil it. It's wonderful.
Well, shall we, since we're talking about the fact that we want to be able to attach things like terrain or change the, I guess, what the city could be. I'm sure when we're using the word city that all of us have a very specific image of what our cities are in your mind if we were all creating the city together. So let's find out how this next card could change that perception.
We're going to add a landmark to our city. So we could have a river in our city, or we could have a dome. River plays very well with Delta. Obviously, wants to keep going in that direction. Dome, more of a constructed, human-made option. So I think those are going to be our two options. I'll keep it at two with the interest of moving us along.
Okay, so who would like a dome in the city? Oh, I feel like people are warming up to the idea. And how about a river? I think the river has claimed it by a landslide. But that, I think, actually very greatly illustrates the question I was asked earlier about how cities can be shaped by other things, because we were saying if we have a delta and if we have a river, that would have been a very different image than the dome. So now that we've attached a river to the city, does anyone feel like the perception or the image they had of their city has shifted just a little bit? Yeah.
So I think if you're well built and you're having a river, there are some really fun things that you can think about. Rivers are, to a certain extent, like almost a living part of nature. There's a long history of flooding. There's actually some fascinating projects you can look at. I think it was in World War I or World War II. Prisoners were actually detained to build scale models of the Mississippi River, like dig it at the same depth and the same turn, so they could start doing predictive experiments on how the floods, because Mississippi flooding actually costs a huge amount of money per year in damage and loss. So rivers, living beasts, hard to tame. Thinking about what season of the river looks like, high season, low season, when the flooding looks like, who built near the river and has access to it, because rivers are fresh water. Also, how does your city treat sanitation? And are they treating this as a water source that needs to be people? Are they treating this as a dumping ground? Are all interesting questions. And then rivers are also kind of like early railroads in a lot of worlds. So before you have steam technology, a lot of the time, river and canal systems become the most efficient and economic way to move large goods between cities. You got a city and a river, trade is going to be super important. Also, like passage through the river, do you have bridges across it? If you have bridges, how do boats get through? These are going to be really fun questions. These don't have to be things that the players necessarily interact with in a tabletop RPG world. Some of this is addressing, but some really interesting encounters where the river is polluted, or it's like if there's actual junk in the river, scavenger species taking it over. That's a really interesting wildlife encounter in a city. You're suddenly fighting like a horde of rabid raccoons or whatever your fancy was.
It's suffering.
Yeah.
So like even like aside from that, it's like I used to watch Man versus Wild up there, and one of the way that shows you get dropped off into the middle of nowhere and have to find his way back to civilization. And one of the truisms that he always followed was you find water and you follow water, and eventually water will lead you to people. For something like you're saying about like kind of, so even if you're in wilderness, like water is always a vital element because of the way it's transportation.
Question in the back.
Where people are studying civilizations like Egypt to see where the old forts and barracks used to be built alongside rivers before the rivers moved and suddenly they had to change the whole economy. When do you start including time elements to some of these leftover structures that could have been very bad in the city that are now just ruins?
I feel like you almost can like sense the next cards that we're gonna pull.
So before we dive into the so basically cover the next one, but after that we have origin cards, which are keeping one backstory. So where's your area coming from? What's something in the past? We have attribute cards, which are like the present day status quo. So one establishing element about what life is like right now. Then we have the advent cards, which are great like session hooks, like these are sort of storyline starters, but they're current events that could change the future of the location. So when in the process suits you is my answer to that. Whenever in the process suits you. Never too early, never too late. But I would say spend time for any major setting thinking about where it came from, where it is now, and where it might be going. Because it's that pivot foot between where it is now and where it might be going, where stories start. And ultimately, if you build a world and it's beautiful and full of all these cool elements and never a story, it's kind of like you've stocked your kitchen, but you haven't cooked a meal for anyone. So I would say, like, pay attention to which ingredients you think you're going to end up in the story and spend the most time on those. And if that is the runes and the stuff in the past, and it's going to be like a discovery of the past adventure, then spend a lot more time thinking about that and getting those.
How often, when you are building your world, do you like grabbing resources of things that exist? So other books about other cities. Do you, when you travel, do you read the placards that are you often on the side of the roads or on a hike? I find that what I like to do is find out what I'm finding interesting. So if I'm in a museum, what interests me about learning about a particular civilization or culture? When I go on a walking tour, what do I find interesting walking down the street? Is it the local street signs? Is it the restaurant? Do I like people watching? Do I like learning about a point of history? I know Toronto actually had an old port that used to be where the water is, and the city has since built out from that. So that's an interesting point. And then I use those things to sort of help guide my own story writing and building my own worlds. Because what I find interesting, likely other people find interesting as well. We are a lot more, I think, universal than we think.
Yeah, I'll build on that specifically because this is where I get to put my work hat on. When it comes to stories, obviously we're our very first audience. We're all going to be looking at our stories that have to be interesting to us for us to have it to tell them. But like my first question when I come in as a director is, well, why does anybody else care, right? So one of the things that the Geographic is doing right now that you guys probably haven't even noticed is it's giving us a really easy look into what you guys are interested in as your hands come up, right? And I'm like making note of these and like, oh, okay, maybe the next thing I put out is specifically about a city with a river in it and all these ways. But
we are all doing market research on each other in this room.
Yeah. But like that's really, really kind of important. Head, which is, well, why? And I'm going to phrase this in terms of like a DM here, but like, why would my player care about this? Because there's a lot of us who loves world build that will exposit way too much, where we'll be like, in the beginning of the four times, and your player's just like, oh my god. So yeah.
Who's actually in this room as DMs?
Okay, all right. There we go. I guess we know our audience.
And any of you writers as well?
Awesome. Yeah. The last thing that I'll note, and this is more DMs into the room, whether you're using a tool to build your world or building your world independently, bringing your players into the process of world building is the best way to have them interested in your lore and your storyline and to be really engaged. I've seen players like give a tour of their hometown because they helped build it. I cannot stress enough how much collaborative world building really invites your players to be participants and not just guests in your world. We had a question over here first.
Yeah, so one of the best things I've ever heard is that the reason we like what was familiar is because we've spent our entire lives witnessing it at a time. But obviously in a fantasy world, we're trying to find something to do it on. When do you like usually find a break between what we know with how a river to what's new and oh well that has so where do you find that break from reality and fantasy and how you
So I think for me, the answer to how to make it seamless, you can write fantasy and anything can happen. It's like, do waterfalls fall up? Not in this reality. But the question isn't necessarily how does it do that. I couldn't tell you the science, I couldn't tell you the magic. But what I can tell you is maybe a little bit about how that would affect the people who live around it. So it's like you probably, like there's a place on top of that one, you want to go up so you can fish that lake. And so it's like people tend to structure their lives around like, economic factors, like what do they do for work? Where does their food come from? So if you start answering those questions, you can make anything feel authentic and lived in. And without necessarily like making people stop and say, well, how does that work? But I think be my answer to that.
Yeah, I think you show the math of how that makes sense, but what you do need to do is show how people have adapted to it, and that will make it feel real, because then your player is in their mind adapting to it, figure out what that means for where you live and interact.
One thing I try to remind people, and this is something, so I remember studying science fiction as part of my literature minor at university, and one of the things that we have to remember is that fantasy worlds and a lot of science fiction, a lot of fantasy historically was written as a representation of our real lives. And we're often used to discuss social, eco-political, economical issues that you might not have been able to talk about. I mean, War of the Worlds was literally about war and invasion of other countries and colonialism. And we use those things because often back in the day, you could be persecuted for writing and discussing those things by straight up saying it. It also creates just enough removal that maybe an audience who might not be receptive when you're saying, hey, now let's talk about racism, to maybe say, hey, let's talk about, how this particular group is not including this particular group of blue-skinned people. And it's sort of teaching us themes and ideas. So there is a grounding back into reality. And where sometimes I find science fiction or fantasy or other genres fall off is when it's just like, I want to create the cool thing for the sake of the cool thing. And that's where sometimes you can also forgive, I would say, like the math of something as well. Now, that being said, I think sometimes if there is a world that is so fleshed out and there's so much buy-in to it, is when you might start getting people, you might have to start taking into due consideration the thing that might seem really grandiose, but your audience might not forgive you for it. So one of the examples that came up in my mind is that in Star Wars, I want to say episode 8, that one moment when, oh my goodness, I forgot her name, but,
Rey?
Huh?
Rey?
No, not Rey. No, but when the one,
Rose.
no, Admiral Captain, she hyperspace kamikazes into the Imperial ship. Beautiful cinematic moment, right? Like, I think incredibly beautiful, has this moment. I remember my baby brother saying, the science makes no sense, but it was so wonderful. I've decided to overlook that, but I know a lot of people did not forgive that. There was a lot of criticism amongst a lot of my peers saying, well, why is there not just kamikaze warfare from the Imperial side all the time? Because they would definitely have no ethics around just like having suicide people, hyperspace suiciding into each other. You could use droids, but I think like it opened up a larger can of worms, and you should have kept it closed. But I think it depends on the size of your world too. If your world's really large, you might have to start taking those things into due consideration. If you're writing a single novel with a really specific theme that you're trying to address, then you probably can forgive the math on it.
And also any rule you establish, like you can now do that. Now your players can do that. Imagine what things you like your players being able to do in any session to you. So just like you give the big bad evil guy a cool weapon, the players are going to lose it. So just like remember that.
I want to take your question, but let's pull the namesake card very quickly, only because I want to also move to the origin card since we were talking about origins. So pull the namesake card. We'll keep this decision maybe between the four of us very quickly, just to keep things going.
So this is probably my favorite card in the deck. We're going to add just a little bit of flavor, and we're going to run the city or the river. So we can have either the summer city, the city of feathers, the city of hunters, or the city without walls. Ultimately, the river without walls, the river of hunters, the river of feathers, and the summer river. I think I like the city of walls as well.
I like the city of walls. There's something evocative there. There's like a mystery that I want to solve. And also, like, I find names are very powerful. That's why I also really like the namesake cards. Is you can the lore brain answers to like why all that. Look at the summer city. It's like the idea of a very seasonal city is interesting too, because that means that there's something about the seasons, and there's something about the river in the season.
So you need like Indianapolis for Gen Con, right?
Yeah.
But it brings me to the question, like, I don't know that when we're talking about grounding in reality, so when we're talking about the city without walls, I studied in these two walled cities. I studied in Derry in Northern Ireland, and I also studied in Osnabrück in Germany. And walled cities obviously have a really specific connotation towards its history, towards whatever political struggle that might have happened there. So if you tear down those walls, what does it mean? And you can actually do the same thing, right? A river without walls, that opens up a question of why was there walls there to begin with, versus like a summer city where, you know, you have like summer palaces in places like China, and you could say, like, is there tourism involved? So it's actually starting to open up a lot of questions for you as well. We'll take the question back and then we'll come to you.
I think everybody has that experience of world building way too much. So, you know, especially as it pertains to being a DM, you know, basically how much world building is enough? Like, is it your players that it's a lack of interest, or conversely, like, how much is too much exposition for something like a novel?
Yeah.
That is enough.
So on the novel side, I would say think about exposition as either downloading or torrenting. I don't know if people still torrent these days. I'm like, media generation. But torrenting is like you're not downloading the whole file all at once. It's relevant to assemble in order, and downloading is like a huge chunk of file all at once. People have limited bandwidth. They're like a 1990s internet connection. So if they're doing exposition, I'd say in a novel especially, don't download, don't give them everything at once. Torrent. This packet of information is relevant for this scene to be interesting and resonant. Oh, and the next scene will be really cool if I can get them this little detail. So just think of the order of information and when it matters and lay it out that way. I would recommend not doing a download. For games, you can do a bit of a download because you don't know what you're going to interact with, but you don't need to do everything. High-level sketch, and then you can stop in the middle of scenes to share something. It's an opportunity for exposition as opposed to like a obligation for exposition.
Yeah, the like age-old adage is like you want to show, not tell, right? And that's very, very important, especially for dealing with a lot of players, because this is my psych background coming in, but there's a lot of players out there who are very ADD and ADHD and all that, and you have to make sure that their stories are put in a tight parcel that they can actually accept all that, right? So you want to introduce a couple things at most, one thing at a time, and then use them as hooks to keep them engaged as you keep having work later.
Actually, speaking about exposition or the size of exposition, this might be a good question for you, Derek. Do you find that there's a difference for communicating worlds to a younger audience versus an adult audience?
Yes, because there's two audiences you have to sell to when you're talking to little kids. You have to take into account their parents too, and what they want to hear. There definitely is, mainly because the types of stories you can tell are important, right? Like you want to impart something on the child, take away from that. Like you want these to be teachable moments. So how do you take, a complex matter and break it down into something very simple, right? And not to equate your adult players to little children, though sometimes they might be. You need to think about like, well, what are they going to be able to take with the story? What's them, right? And the similarities between the two is you have to understand what your audience is capable of thinking about, what's currently interesting to them, what is it that you're trying to leave them with, like a moral to fable, right? Like what can you take away? And the most powerful types of stories are things that you can, at any point in life, carry with you forever.
And yeah, to like follow up from that, like to answer your question a little bit more as well. Like one thing is you don't have to do all your exposition at once. It's like to make it more interesting for players, focus on what's relevant to the story at that time. For example, that like somebody else pointed out to me recently, the show like One Piece. They will like it sounds like a joke, but there's a reason they keep going for 1,000 episodes. Where they'll tell you there are 7 warlords of the sea, but they only tell you the identity of one of them. And that's the one they're fighting now, and you don't know about the other 6. So you do finally meet another one. It's like, oh, you know that somebody's important, and also you're learning about them in real time. So you're not like, they don't tell you all 7 names at once, because really it doesn't matter if you're fighting one of them. So you can like set something up that's big and grand, but focus on the pieces that are relevant to the thing that they're trying to solve right now.
And we've got 15 minutes left. So I think we're going to do a little sneaky thing about corner tech, which is where you put the card on the side.
Let's just break the rules instantly.
Breaking the rules. Choose both. You leave both up. And I love this because a lot of cities have multiple, a lot of things are known for different games, and you have like different power groups that have a reason for one to think of it a certain way as opposed to another way. So we'll figure it out later. But for now, I'd like to hear that it's known as both the City Without Walls and the Summer City, and that who uses which name might tell you something about what they find interesting about this.
Maybe I'll take your question in just a second. And since we had those 4 options, just for curiosity's sake, who was more attached to the City Without Walls? And who was more attached to the Summer City? Okay, your question here?
So one thing I've kind of touched on genre much in this case. There's a great difference between having high fantasies, your low fantasies, just weird fantasy or strange fiction. And even then how you might end up just as a straight noir or sort of perfect plot situation.
We literally
I just imagined an Earth that is a butt shape.
Earth and Earth and Earth.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is that time is precious in this 50 minutes that we have together. Otherwise, we could be going in sessions. We literally do hour-and-a-half live streams on single genres alone, or just like digging into small granular things, right? In the moment, we get to just have a conversation with you for 50 minutes. But so, the story Deck of Worlds is our core deck, and it's meant to be genre agnostic. And you obviously have the opportunity to plug science fiction or fantasy or horror or other genre elements into it. We actually have fantasy expansions that could be used to plug into the deck. For the sake of today's demonstration, we're staying a little bit genre agnostic, but obviously this can apply to any sort of world you want to create.
Yeah, and so we actually have a free lesson plan series that we did for this deck for classroom. The 3rd lesson plan is about world building and genre, and like it's meant for sort of grade 6 to high school. And I know that we're in this room, most of us are past that, but it is a great primer for like framing discussion questions about how does genre impact world building. So I'll just highlight that resource as a cool thing, or come chat with us at the table. Actually, really fun
We're at
conversation.
booth 1237. If you guys want to chat with us about world building over this weekend, or get a chance to muck about a little bit more, how it could support you. But let's pull an origin card, because I feel like we've been teasing that. That's our world building teasing, the origin card.
So these are like 4 things about history. So is our city or our river the birthplace of a world religion? Abandoned when mineral deposits ran out? Was it the site of an infamous duel? Or was it created by the meeting of 2 cultures?
Ooh. Actually, I want the show of hands for just understanding what people find interesting.
Okay. So we'll do it very quickly. Eric announced one, and then we'll take the hands, and I'll do a quick count.
We'll start with infamous duel.
Okay. Ooh, I feel like that landslide. I'm going to keep that in my brain.
There.
Okay.
I should have done that one first.
Yeah. Okay, so
I want to hear from the audience. For those of you who voted that, I would love to hear why the intersection of 2 cultures is so interesting to you. How about you in front? Oh!
I like the concept that the walls maybe came down to.
Yeah.
Maybe like before that, I was thinking about rivers and culture.
We could be at the fork of a river where it's like 2 tributaries come together to form the larger river.
And now I want to know more about the bridge. I want to know more about how they're connected.
Wherever the wall goes.
Oh, wait, sorry, say that again?
Rivers are birthplaces of civilizations. So
Yeah.
there's only one river here. Multiple river, and then how did they historically interact in a formal functioning society?
Yeah, great questions.
If it's also known as a summer city, it's summer, the, time of year is beautiful, or a major event happening. Creates more questions than answer.
Yeah. Nice, yes.
I think Summer City, kind of south of walls down, so like, maybe the two people, classes of people, and then kind of,
Yes. I have my city, and then I have my summer city that I go to when I'm on vacation.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear all your ideas, but we'll just keep chugging along here.
Maybe we draw one more card.
Yes.
Yeah, graduate to the present day details here.
So if origin was the past, this is something that you might see if we visited this city today. So does it have a high crime rate? Is it the site of nature worship? Is it the source of a rare fruit? Or is strict silence expected at all times?
Attribute.
Yeah.
So this is like more like the first one was more about something that happened a long time ago at this location. This one is something that's the present day.
I like the idea that strict silence must be enforced at all times because it really just shifts this whole perception that we've had up to this date about the city. And cities are known to generally bustle. And since we're calling it a city without walls, a summer city, and it has a meeting of two cultures, I think in our minds, we've started populating the city. And I don't know about you, but the city has gotten to a reasonable size. The fact that silence needs to be enforced at all times, it kind of like adds a tension. And I like adding tension to things.
Yeah. Yeah, the issue that's how the cultures get along. They just don't talk about it.
If you have two cultures, you have an in culture and an out culture, and that's what the dominant culture says it is. So a high crime rate means an underclass that is being persecuted by the overclass.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting opportunity to use the definition of a word to look at who controls in the world.
I've seen many times civilizations fight over certain resources. So having a rare resource of some kind, like say a fruit, is like it's only available in this one specific spot. And two of these cultures like, hey, we use this fruit this way, but we still need that fruit, and that's what divided in. So it's like, yeah, eventually they say, you can fight over fruit. Let's keep it together.
Yeah. So one of my favorite pet things in world building is always food. Other cards in this deck are something like culturally specific bread or culturally specific pies. Like whenever you start thinking about like the ingredients that you use, like culturally specific bread is the difference between a baguette and naan. It tells you about like the technology they use to make the bread. It tells you about the ingredients they have available. So it's like, and it's something very, very basic that I always find is like that's the backdrop whatever you do, because like we don't spend. You're here to go on an adventure, but like the thing that grounds it in reality is that you don't spend every day of your life on an adventure. That's the high point. That's the exciting thing that happens. The actual like world building is kind of like the day to day. What do you eat in the morning? Like where do you kind of like go to get a drink at night?
It's also where you find charm. I think there's an anime that I have taken to in the last year called Restaurant to Another World. And it's, this little quaint kind of Western style restaurant in Japan, but for some reason, portals from a fantasy world just regularly open into this restaurant. And these people are coming in saying, I don't know how you have these shrimp in the restaurant because I'm in the middle of the mountains. And they're like, oh, things just get flown in. And they're like, I can't believe you have this technology. Or seeing, someone develop a magical spell just so that she could keep the custard she bought cold. It really shows that these things that are innocuous for some people are miracles for other people. And that actually is really good for fleshing out lore as well.
Yeah. What I'm going to do is, we've never done this before.
No.
We're doing it for you because we haven't really talked about nature worship, so I'm gonna cover that one for now.
Oh my goodness.
All three of these things are true at the same time. It's a triple tech, friends. We've invented a new.
When you have the creator of a deck here, is that the creator just smashes all the rules, which I guess has like some symbolism towards world building.
Yeah, also we call it a guidebook, not a rule book. And one of the first rules is like anything you don't like, just do it differently. So
it is true. It's like it's whatever serves your world. Like we use these prompts for association because they get things that you might not expect to get you going. But if you like all of it, keep all of it.
Yeah.
And if you like some, draw another. If you don't like it, draw another card. It's whatever really serves your world.
Yeah, and so for drawing another card, I'm going to end with our creative director here leading the charge. So you make a lot of decisions about what's going to make an interesting story, what's going to compel players. You sort of oversee the campaign. So we'll draw an advent card. Advents are current events that could change the future of the location. I want you to tell us what you think would make for a good campaign, or how you would sort of construct this as a prompt for developing.
Why don't you hold it up to the projector?
Please hold it up. Someone read it out for me too, because I can't read it.
So we have a scientific breakthrough is causing controversy. It is seen as immoral, reckless, or breaking tradition. Or a world record is about to be broken. Largest plant or animal, extreme temperature, or an athletic feat. Oh wow! I was watching the Olympics right now.
Yeah. So between both of these are both really good in a story. It really kind of depends on the audience that you're intending this for. For example, if this is for a bunch of sports pros that play sports ball, then probably you're going to be looking at that athletic event, the world record possibly. And it also ties into things like, if we have this extremely rare fruit, well, what if we make it rarer, right? That we've got this new thing everyone's looking at. Between the two, though, I think the breakthrough makes a lot more way to tell stories. It ties back to the idea of what is or isn't available, technologically speaking, who it's available to, and it starts setting up all. The word I like to use for this is in that story, which provides a lot more opportunity not only for writers who want to tell, but for players to be able to experience stories that matter to them. And the most significant determining factor for that is whether or not they feel like they're having an actual influence on your world. Right? A lot of the time, go for it.
In this case, you could actually go with both, because that new technology leading towards some fruit that, yes, it's breaking records, but people could be saying this is an abomination, or this is a bad way to go. It's taking us away from our traditional growth patterns. So you could easily incorporate both of those.
See, you're changing the rules too. Guidebook. Yeah. So they're really it's so rich and vibrant. It comes down to what's most appealing, right? Gamers as well as writers. Provided that this is something that you can tell a compelling story with, that's where it goes without getting down too much detail. So having both prompts could provide you with that storyline. That's a very tight story you can tell. You can tell in a way that players can absorb really easily.
And even as like technology, it's like we had this expectation of silence. You could do something. It's like maybe the technological breakthrough is a new form of communication. There's always kind of like once you start finding things you like, if it's important enough, it all kind of comes back together, back to that same thing a little bit.
It's actually it's occurring to me that a bunch of these prompts are actually in Songweave Tapestry, which is the campaign that Derek and I wrote for EMBERWIND. There's a technological breakthrough that's about to happen. The entire premise of that storyline, it takes place in a major city that doesn't have walls, in a rare fruit, like an extremely rare and like very powerful fruit. We're talking like gum level fruit here. Is hidden in the background of the story, some of the secret bits of lore. So, it's interesting to kind of give some resonances.
Yeah.
So, and at some point, I know earlier we were talking about scale, and I guess scale really comes down to how far your world goes. In this, we created one micro setting together, which, I mean, in some ways it's not so micro because it is a city, but if you are moving on from that, you can build more clusters, right? Like you have the opportunity to, if you're using the deck specifically, you have the opportunity to start all over again and create yourself a world map. And the interesting thing is if you take that moment and draw several different clusters, you can now see how they talk to each other, right? And now you have a continent. Now you have a world, because in the end, the world could be as small as you want it to be, or it could be as large as you want it to be.
Yeah, to kind of neatly tie up everything that's being said here, not that we're saying this yet. yet, but.
Actually,
Okay, never mind.
yeah.
So to neatly
Last-
tie this
last
all up,
comment.
yeah. To go back to kind of the way that One Piece is telling story, I want to tell you what's relevant at the time. The Song Tapestry is a campaign book that we all work together on for EMBERWIND, which is a role-playing game that I publish. And it is only about this particular thing. You can see how rich this is. There's so much you can tell already. But we have other campaign books, and each book focuses on another collection of cards, another part of the world that has their own unique identifiers, ways that that all kind of piece together. And you can experience them all independently, or if you want, you can experience them all in parallel. And then as the little hooks start to come together and the strings get tied, that's where the players start to really invest in the world that you have.
You'll get the strengths and connect the different parts here. You will find really rich experiences.
And actually, I'm going to jump on something that you said earlier, that like you can build a world with your players, and it might seem like a spoiler, but this isn't necessarily telling a story yet.
Yeah.
And it's one thing that's interesting about like world building in context, like we all have some knowledge of places we've never been to. It's like we're in Indianapolis right now. It's like we all have New York or LA or like what those places are, even if you've never been there. So you kind of expect it isn't like your players have kind of like ambient knowledge of other places that exist in their world, some like the stereotypes or like thoughts that people might have, and it's like that's often this interesting to dig into. So you can like let your players have some of that knowledge about, and like if you do make a world with them, it becomes like makes them feel more immersed in it the way they would be in the real world.
Well, we have been Nomnivore Games, EMBERWIND, and the Story Engine deck. You can find us at booth 1237. That's actually both of our booth numbers. If you want to have more about world building, you want to deck for do some more world building with you. And I know Miroki and I, and possibly Derek, will be available outside the room after the panel if you want to chat more, and we can do more questions. Eric's going to run back to the booth. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I appreciate your questions. I appreciate your